Hi guys, so welcome to the halftime review. We appreciate you guys joining us, and or hopefully will be beneficial to everyone. So myself and George came up with the theme of increasing tempo within training. So we've tried to narrow it down to some key areas that we think kind of target towards increasing tempo within training. So those are going to be three ways which we're going to discuss. And hopefully that was with a twinned idea that they're quite simplistic, but also they're quite easy to go to, if you like, as frameworks for when you're planning and then when you're in the heat of the moment of the session. And then finally, really having a key structure to coming up with these ways of increasing tempo within training for how you do it, when you do it, and then ultimately why you do it with a bit of rationale. Why do we increase tempo within training? So to kick us off, we've tried to use a step principle, which is obviously synonymous in coaching, but mainly the step principle is used for differentiation. But we try to use the key breakdown in the step principle with space, time, equipment, and people, but actually come up with some ideas that are related to increasing tempo specifically. So here's some of the key things that we came up with. And please feel free to throw some ideas in the chat box. We thought we'd just keep it to three main ones that we like for each. So for space, we're really looking at ultimately using the right amount of space that you need for the session. And that could literally be down to 2 yards too many, and that affecting the intensity of your session, when you might just need to narrow it or widen the session to get that intensity out, or certainly like the length. Also really looking at the shape as well as the size is like using funnel type activities. So it might be that you've got a possession area, 30 by 20, but also you've got like a funnel added on to that with a direction towards the goal. Having that type of area added on can also increase intensity because you're working towards a goal, which we'll touch on under equipment, where players can bring a more increased tempo to their own behaviour in their efforts in training. On that one, particularly with the funnel type activity, using conditioned zones can also allow an area of the pitch that you're using for the session to have a higher intensity than maybe others. An example could be you've got that possession example that I just used, and you're really looking at just go back. You're really looking at that maybe it's a 1v1 scenario. So you've got the possession working towards your number 9, and actually the 1v1 plus the goalkeeper, and particularly that area is going to be maybe more of an intense area potentially than the possession. But then again, that's up to you as a coach and your skills to try and make sure both areas are intense.
So the next part we were looking at is time and how we can use time to manipulate intensity and tempo within your session. I think an important one to look at first is your work to rest ratios and how we're planning those within our sessions. And I think, I'm guilty of it. I think we all probably are at some point in time where, we have an activity going and we kind of just wing it in terms of how long we're having the players work for, and then how long the rest is. But I mean, the importance of having a balanced work to rest ratio is because if you're wanting to push your players, to a maximal level, do they then have adequate rest after each round for their bodies to recover and reset, ready to go again? If I think a ratio that I took from a course before was 1 to 1.5. So, if you're working for a minute round, they've got a minute 30 off while they're waiting to go back in again. If you do not have that adequate rest time, do the players come back in, but they can't perform to the same level that you want them to? The next one, we were looking at limiting time. There's a couple of things that we can do within limiting time. The first one we looked at was time challenges. And then one specifically in time challenges could be a race against the clock. Let's say you are working on finishing with your strikers. Maybe you give them 5 minutes and they've got to hit a target of goals. 5 minutes to score 10 goals. So there's a race against the clock, race against the time there that hopefully, with that in place will increase their intensity within the session. Of course, you want to be mindful that you don't take anything away from, their technique within that. Another one could be, maybe it's foundation phase and you've set a 1 minute challenge, a race against the clock. How many times can you juggle the ball? Could be something as simple as that. The second one could be scenario-based limitations. So let's say small-sided game, 4v4, 5v5, whatever it might be. Teams 1-0 down. Can you give them a scenario? We're going to add 3 minutes of time to the end of this game. You're 1-0 down. It's a semi-final of the Champions League. You need to draw to take this game into extra time. And then you've set them a challenge. They're limited by the time. They have to go and score a goal. Then on the flip side, the team that are 1-0 up are then thinking, I have to defend. We don't want to lose this game. So the intensity of their defending then potentially goes up. That's another way we can look at limiting time. And then lastly, countdown kind of ties into both of them a little bit. But, maybe this is something you're using at the end of the game. You want to get a little burst of intensity, increased tempo as a finisher. So, maybe it's 30 seconds, next team to score a goal. 30 seconds, next shot on target, wins the game or something like that. Just to get that little boost, in the final parts of the session.
Fantastic. Yeah, and just moving on to equipment. These are 3 personal ones I've found over time in terms of coaching that are easy ones to make sure that you keep on top of in terms of having balls in key areas of the pitch. So if it's a small-sided game, you have plenty of balls in 2 separate ball banks beside the goals. So if it goes out, a rule I typically can use is the game restarts with the goalkeeper. Or it might be that a game actually just starts at the side of the pitch, but the coach has got plenty of them. The second one is obviously trying to have goals in every session that you do, regardless of topic. I think it's key to try and give that little bit of a reward to players to actually score the goal, because ultimately that is the whole point of playing football, to score and win games. In terms of practice design, I think you can use small goals for 1v1, 2v2 type practices. Or if you've got bigger goals that are of the right game format for that particular age, whether 7v7, 9v9 or 11v11, then I feel like, in my experience, that the sessions are always been more intense and you become less frustrated with trying to maintain or increase tempo within training, because having the goals there kind of does that for you. As a plan B, there's always times where you don't have goals. So like, what do you do? And I've scratched my head plenty of time on a training pitch, especially if I'm expecting goals and they've been stolen by another coach in the other half. Is trying to have targets. Now that could be people, it could be the coach, it could be a neutral player, it could be target areas that you've coned off, or it might even be working through certain gates at an end where you may have the goal. So those are some ways I use the equipment to try and manipulate to increase tempo within training.
Brilliant. So then last ones, we're looking at people, and these 3 things that we have in their competition, challenges and group, and I think are very important, and a lot of times come within our planning of the session. But is there competition within your activities? Is that a 1v1 competition? Perhaps you're doing a technical practice and you've turned it into a 1v1 race. So there's competition, there's challenge, there's engagement. Is it group competition? Maybe it's small-sided games as simple as one team versus the other, but you're setting some kind of challenge within there. Who scored the most goals within a ladder tournament, let's say, who has kept the most clean sheets. Is it an immediate competition? So are they winning that competition within training, or is it a running competition? So, we had an example on here a couple of weeks ago with Stuart, and you know, I've seen this done before, but let's say you've got a 6-week block of futsal. Are you recording goals scored? Are you recording what teams have won games? Who's keeping clean sheets? Can you then feed that data back to the players and you know, keep a chart of the player that's influencing the most games, or the player that scored the most goals? Or maybe it's the players that, you know, might be at the bottom and they've conceded a lot. So then maybe you are asking them to focus a little bit more on the defending. That could increase, you know, their desire to work harder, play faster, you know, within those activities. Next one is challenge. And then, you know, really you've got overall challenge for the whole group, and then your individual challenges as well per player. An example of an overall challenge that you could look at could be number of entries into the final third for your attacking team. If you're looking at a phase of player building into the final third, you want your challenges to be somewhat quantitative, so you can count them, they can count them, they can keep track of them. An individual challenge, you know, you might give one to your 9. You know, within this next 10 minutes, can you receive the ball and roll the centre back to then have a shot? You know, it could be something as simple as that. But, you know, those individual challenges also, you know, can also be used within the overall challenge given to the team. Then the last one's grouping, and we'll see a little bit of this later on a video that we have. But are you being mindful of players that you're putting together within the team or against each other? You know, are they players of similar abilities? Or do you have, you know, your best player on the team against a player that might be lacking a little bit more technically? You know, is that going to help them, you know, with their intensity? Or is the player that's slightly better kind of just going to walk through the practice because it's too easy for them? You'll see an example later, but, you know, within your groupings of teams, you know, maybe you're having players from one part of your town versus players from another part of your town. So then there's a little bit of buy-in to their teams and a little bit more competition and desire to win those games.
Great. So next is, we're just going to play a clip before we move on to coach behaviour. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone's seen this clip, but wanted to share it with you.
Jim too. Oh shit, somebody else again. No, not fucking one of them. Bloody hell, I want you ready, lads, in about a minute, lads, eh? If you became a top team, you have to score the fucking goal, guys. If we don't fucking score, we don't score. But we will fucking score. He's protecting players. He has to hold the referees around. All the specialists he needs to protect the players. Let's fucking get leathered in and do not shirk a fucking tackle. Fucking tackle! Locker room is the nicest place. Nicest. I don't like injured lads around the dressing room. I don't like anybody moving around the dressing room. Danny, go and get it back, son. Go and have to wait so I don't sit. You'll make me feel sick if I look at you. Good afternoon. Today the team is start Ederson, Kyle, John, Nico. Lids, you're on bench. Of course, I'm going to defend you until the last day in our lives in the press conference. I stick up for you lot every fucking week in press. I stick up and stick up.
So again, there's some different ways of coaches using their behaviour to interact with players, or maybe not solely to create an intensity or increase tempo within the session, but certainly in the behaviour, we've tried to look at a little bit of alliteration to try and make it a bit more memorable, particularly when planning, and like I say, or in the session itself. So we came up with these 3 that we feel would be worthwhile sharing. And the first one's enthusiasm. So really looking at inspiring the players that you work with, but also maybe inspiring coaches or staff that you work with if you work within a multidisciplinary team, and really being a role model. And that'll be one way we can obviously inspire others. Contagious. So your body language in terms of rubbing off on others is one. Like greeting players with a smile is an obvious one, but certainly throughout the session, trying to make sure that the way you hold yourself and your body language in terms of key moments, if you can recognize that the session's dipping in tempo, it might be that you need to bring something to the session through your enthusiasm and your behavior. And then lastly, under enthusiasm would be your communication. So raising your voice, lowering your voice, being clear, concise, and then using some real key buzzwords that could link into, for instance, competition. One that I like to use is, we've got 3 minutes injury time left, and using a type of game scenario based approach. So they can maybe link that particular session to a game that they might play on the weekend.
Perfect. Then, we decided after enthusiasm, you got to look at your environment. And when you think of environment, you often think of the environment you create as a coach, and that's kind of over a long period of time. But we're kind of thinking more of a shorter period, like there and then. And the first one we thought of was fun. Is your activity fun? Is there an aspect of fun to your activity? Can you get players to work hard, to work at an increased tempo if the activity is dull, quite mundane? Really, you're looking for a kind of a crowd pleaser activity, I guess we could say. Something where when you tell the players or demonstrate to the players what you're doing, they're already bought in. They love it. They can't wait to get started. Small-sided games, shooting, stuff like that are ones that would come to mind. You've got to make sure it's enjoyable for players. And I think this is important at any age group, whether it's foundation phase or you're in the senior game. People play sport because it's fun. They enjoy it initially, right? So you want to make sure that there's some aspect of fun within it. Next one, which kind of goes into your planning, is it progressive? Do you have progressions within your session? So, you're layering your session, you have progressions of where you want it to go, but do you have individual progressions? Can you progress it for your top level player that's finding it too easy and just ghosting through the session and just kind of getting by? Can you progress it for those players, make it harder, make it challenging, and really push them? Then on the other end of the spectrum, can you adapt? Do you have things in your plan where you can adapt for the players that might not be, so capable technically within the theme that you're working on? Can you, reduce the challenge a little bit so it's challenging for them at the same time, and they can still, work to a higher tempo without thinking, the session's got away from them? So I think it's important you have that in your planning, when you're thinking of ways you can increase, tempo and intensity in your sessions.
Yeah, and I think the last one, it goes on being educated in basically what you do. So I think some of the webinars I've been on recently, and rightly so, have taught about observation skills. And actually, as keen as we are in terms of putting so much time into planning the session, maybe as much as a session time is, we've took planning to that same amount of time. Is to actually let the session start and then step back and observe what needs tweaked to make sure that the session tempo is still high. Is the task too difficult? Is it too easy? Linking that into knowledge base is key. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but knowing your players can obviously help that in terms of when you're looking onto the pitch. And then experience of not only your players, but also experience of maybe delivering that session or a similar session. Is it something you can quickly change that you know has worked previously? Because sometimes, the reality is, as much as you might take a session plan to your session, you might not have it right there. You don't want to step away from the session and go and have a look, because you want to keep engaged with the session and try and keep the flow to it. And also, there might be a demand that you need to just do it there and then. What are you going to change in the session to increase the tempo? Is there something, like I said, that you've used previously in a similar session? Or if it's a session that you've done before, what did you use? Go on, use it again. And again, that probably also links into being persevering as a coach, because sometimes it might be the right thing to change in your session from experience, but you might need to give it a second or third go to get maybe the desired outcome. All right, so again, if there's any questions, please feel free to use the chat box. Like me and George will happily try and answer your questions, or we'll certainly have some time at the end as well, so not a problem.
So next, we kind of, after putting this kind of topic, in our minds, at the forefront of our minds, we thought about the rationale behind, why you want to increase tempo in your session. So these are a few points. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are some of the points that we came up with that we thought were key for this webinar, and reasons behind doing this. The first one, I guess I'll pick out a couple and just talk about them briefly. But one of the ones that stood out was to improve physiological attributes. So let's for example, in that we want to replicate the demands of the game. Everything we do in training is to replicate the game, is to prepare players for the game. So if you take pressing, for example, that's a high intensity kind of part of the game. If you're doing a pressing session and your players aren't, working hard, not working at the right intensity or the right tempo, are they going to be able to then do that in a game to the level that you want them to do it? So we thought that was, important. Another one that we looked at was increasing competitiveness. And I think, the definition of competitiveness probably changes depending on what phase you're in, but I think it's important throughout. In these sessions that have a high tempo and that have a high intensity, you can embed, competitive principles to your younger players and to players as they move through the phases. You're adding pressure around the activities. Can we use, an increase in tempo and an increase in intensity to stress the players mentally, physically, and emotionally? Because when they get onto the pitch, let's say they've gone through the foundation phase up until the professional development phase, senior football. Okay, what's that environment like to them? That's highly competitive. There's a lot of stress coming in for them, physically, emotionally, and mentally. So can we build these things in through raising tempo and intensity within our sessions?
Great. And just leading on from that, I know George mentioned some examples of the psychological attributes. So some things that I've got down in terms of concentration, there'll be an automatic demand on concentration for players when in an intense or high tempo session. There's going to probably be more failure. So kids are going to fail more often, or young adults or seniors, depending on what age you work with. So automatically, psychologically, they're going to be challenged with their perseverance to keep going, to keep trying to find the ways to get success. And that could be personally to them. It could be in line with a group challenge, like George said in the previous slides. So concentration and perseverance are two ways psychologically increasing tempo within sessions are going to be benefited. Another one could be decision making. A quick fire back to the step principle in terms of size of the area. Shorter distances, the less time and less distance you have is going to make players make quicker decisions, but more frequently, because space is limited and they're going to be under pressure quicker, earlier, and more often than if the size of the area is bigger than what's needed for your session. And lastly, which I think all practices are really an extension of the game. So I think replicating the game in terms of having that intensity is a fundamental reason why you want to increase tempo within training, is because you want to somewhat replicate what you're going to get in a game, whether it be a tournament, whether it be a league game, whatever it is. Replicating the games can be tough sometimes, but like I say, in the planning stages of your session, or certainly having like this like bank of the step principle, or going to your coaching behavior, easy for me to say, is hopefully somewhat a simplistic way of going to like a little library in your head of how to increase tempo. But we've got 9 reasons why you increase tempo there, and like I say, replicating the game for me is one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest.
So the next bit, we just want to paint a few pictures, and we got a few videos that we're going to have you to watch, and really we want you to think about, and if you want to put in the chat box how have these coaches increase tempo within their sessions. So we'll show you the clips, and we'll let you think about that as they're playing, and then at the end we'll kind of say some things that we thought of. But 3 different types of clips, kind of tying everything we've talked into throughout. But we'll play them and we'll see what you think as you're watching them.
Good. Don't be beaten. Well done, youngster. Well done. You beat him, but you come up too fast. Well done. Don't lose the goal. Come on. Tight. Tight. Good. Good. Don't let him face you up. Well done. Very good. Stay. Good. Keep going. Keep going. Well done. Don't let him beat you. Well done, you two. Last ball. There you go. The other way around. Good. Don't be beaten. Don't be beaten. Come on. Need to work hard. Okay. Well done. Come on, come on, guys. Bounce it.
Okay, so just before we go into the review, sorry, I'll just come out with that. So me and George just want to touch on some of the things that we noticed in the sessions, and I'll let George kind of kick us off.
So obviously Pep in the first one, and you could watch videos of Pep coaching all day, and he ticks all the kind of boxes that we've gone through. But the main ones I saw on the clip that we showed is how he's varying his verbal, so his tone and volume changed as the phase of play moved on. He was demanding of his players. He's commentating throughout. He's giving feedback as they're working. And I'm sure all of you have seen videos of Pep coaching, but he's enthusiastic about everything he does. Certainly he would inspire players doing that. He's very knowledgeable. He was enforcing what he wanted to do. So just that 16-second clip, you're already seeing, many ways that he's increased and kept the tempo of his session at a certain level. And, if you watch the whole, I think it was 10-minute clip that I took that from, he's moving around. His body language, he's using his arms, he's talking, he's constantly on top of his players, demanding more, using cues and things like that. Moving on to Moisey, his session's a little bit different, younger age group. He's doing defending. First thing you notice is the area. It's a small area. So obviously a smaller area, there's going to be an increased tempo because there's more body contact. The players are going to be, working together a lot closer. I think his position on the side or with ball, so he can get the ball back in quicker, was great. But he's also using cues throughout. He was using main cues that he wanted them to think about in the session throughout. He was demanding. He commentated throughout to the players, pushing them on. And he was enforcing, the principles that he was trying to get out of the session. And obviously, I think it was important just to see, someone like Pep using that with, top level players, internationals, elite, world-class players, but then also seeing, another great manager in David Moyes using it with, development phase age, professional development phase players. So I think that was important.
Great, yeah, and just to add on with painting pictures with the England clip, some of the points I've put on more towards practice design. So there was 2 11v11 goals used. It was pretty much, this area size was probably 2 18-yard boxes. So the opportunity and repetition to score goals was high. Obviously, you could see the enjoyment on the players. Like you say, there's players don't outgrow the fun element. It's a crowd pleaser. I'm sure it's probably those type of practices are coaches' favourites, or certainly in the top 5. I know it is for me because it's a game. It's got lots of opportunities to score, and also I'm sure there's multiple, obviously, topics you can try and coach within that. And you may need to tweak the size and task within that relating to your topic that you want to deliver. Also, grouping players. So I think if me and George has got this right, it seemed like more of the Manchester United players were on one team. So that goes back to grouping, which falls under the P for people under the STEP principle. And yeah, just trying to create this and this competition level where you deliberately pair players or group players before the session in your planning stage, as opposed to during it and just saying 1, 2, 3, go there, and it could be any 3 players. Actually, could it be, if you play 4-3-3, could it be your 3 midfielders together in a certain type of 3v3 practice? So straight away, you don't also build relationships in your session, but also you increase intensity because they want to work for each other. There's like a mini unit or mini relationships there, and you don't want to let each other down, and you want to perform as best as you can. So those are maybe some things to think about when delivering your session and grouping players. So I think that's about it. There's a few things that we just want to review basically, but before we do that, I just want to open it up. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to use the chat box and we can kind of go from there. But hopefully in this webinar, we've really touched on recognizing a different way to view the STEP principle other than just for differentiation, to understand different coach behaviors which help encourage intensity with training. And I know George has touched on it there, particularly with Pep and David Moyes, with commentating, the language they use, how often they use it. And finally, why do we do it? What's the purpose behind increasing tempo within training? And we've got some rationale for that. Yeah, George?
No. Yeah, hopefully you've taken something away from this webinar. That's kind of why we put it together. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box, or you can email them to us after. This stuff on here is by no means an inclusive list, but this is things that we believe are important and believe are very useful tools when you're trying to increase tempo and intensity within your sessions. I think they're applicable at any age group, which is also why we've decided to pick some of these things perhaps over other things that you as a coach might use a lot and think's more important. But again, we appreciate you all coming to jumping on the webinar. We will upload this to YouTube if you want to catch up and make some more notes later. If you have any questions, feel free to email us, DM us, and this will also be on our website too. We'll have details of some other webinars coming up pretty soon, and hopefully we will be able to catch you then. So thanks for jumping on and spending the evening with us, and hopefully we'll talk to you all soon.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. And like we say, if we have got any questions, then we're going to hang around for the next minute or so if people want to ping it to us. But if not, thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of